Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the USDA NRCS Regenerative Pilot Program and Certified Technical Service Provider presentation. I think this is a great example of if you build it, they will come. This presentation has been a labor of love for our technical service provider branch as we try to reach many people to become technical experts that can work with our agency and with producers to get conservation on the land. We have now reached over 1,000 people that are on this call, and I expect more to join. Thank you so much for taking the time to hear about RPP and about TSPs. We're going to move into the agenda now. All right. So our primary audience for this call are technical experts that can help to put conservation on the land, help our producers as they implement our conservation programs. We know that there are many producers on the line, as well as other organizations and individuals that are interested in the work that we are doing with conservation, and we appreciate you joining. We hope that there is something for everyone in this presentation. I'll start with an overview of the Regenerative Pilot Program and technical service providers, so we're all on the same page and can jump into the more details of conservation planning. We're going to talk about the TSP roles through the RPP conservation planning process. Allison Aquino, who is our regional certifier for TSPs, as well as the acting regional coordinator for the West, will dig into this topic and cover conservation planning activities and whole farm assessments, monitoring assessment through CEMAs, designing selected practices with DIAs. And for those that don't know, CEMAs are conservation evaluation monitoring activities, and DIAs are our design, implementation, and analysis activities. And of course, Allison's going to dig a little more into that. She's also going to cover other TSP support through the 900 series of codes. We're going to highlight here, Amanda Branham is with us from the Soil Health Division, and we're going to highlight CEMA 216, soil health testing, as it's an important component of the Regenerative Pilot Program. And we're going to talk about the process to become a certified TSP. Our National TSP Program Manager, Charlotte Brewster, is an expert in this area and is going to take us through the initial TSP certification agreement and modifying to add RPP work. Then we're going to go to the summary and wrap up and have a question and answer session. Again, the Q&A function is at the top of your screen, and you may have to scroll to see answers to your questions, but we will have some verbal questions at the end. You'll have entered those questions throughout the presentation, and then we'll go over those verbally with our TSP branch. Peter Hoagland is going to host that. The questions that we can't get to today, we will be covering in a frequently asked questions document that will be posted on our website at nrcs.usda.gov/TSP. All right, let's move on. Okay, so the Regenerative Pilot Program. Regenerative agriculture is a conservation management approach that emphasizes natural resources through improved soil health, water management, and natural vitality for the productivity and prosperity of agriculture and communities. The RPP, the Regenerative Pilot Program, addresses whole farm resource concerns through support for voluntary regenerative agriculture conservation plans. Currently, NRCS programs supporting RPP include our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which is the flagship NRCS conservation program that helps farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners integrate conservation into working lands. And the Conservation Stewardship Program, which helps producers build on their existing conservation efforts while strengthening their operation. And you can learn more about our programs and initiatives on our website. Okay, so if you're in the habit of taking screenshots, this one is a great one. It is a quick card to show what RPP looks like in the two different programs. And I know it looks a little confusing, but I'm going to walk you through it. So the Environmental Quality Incentives programs, when you're working with RPP with EQIP, you're going to cover all land that encompasses the whole farm when you do evaluations. Whereas under the Conservation Stewardship Program, all land under control for the life of the contract will be evaluated. For both programs, all applicable resource concerns will be evaluated. And that's what we're calling the whole farm assessment. On the EQIP side, for at least one land unit, soil and water resource concern thresholds have to be at a met condition by the end of the contract. And for CSP, on at least one land use, range, pasture, crop, or forest land, soil and water resource concern thresholds have to be at a met condition by the end of the contract. For both programs, at least one land unit must meet the following. One primary RPP practice must be planned or currently being implemented, or must be planned or be implemented through the contract, or currently being implemented on their land. So for the soil health testing has to be done at the beginning and the end of the contract. So let me cover that one more time because it's important. For at least one land unit, you have to have one primary RPP practice, which we'll go over the list later in this presentation, and it has to be either planned or currently be implemented on the producer's land for that land unit. And then you also have to have soil health testing at the beginning and the end of the contract. Finally, there has to be a minimum 5-year contract for RPP. One other note for planned practices necessary to achieve these soil and water outcomes, they must be contracted. So you're going to evaluate all the resource concerns if you're working with a producer on RPP, but you need to make sure that at least the soil and water outcomes can be achieved with the practices that are put on that contract. Then all other applicable program requirements apply, including the CSP stewardship threshold eligibility. And that information is on the program's website that was on the previous slide, as well as you need to know that qualified applications may or may not be funded. Okay, so that chart is a little complicated, but hopefully it helps as a good refresh on what is needed for the Regenerative Pilot Program. Here is a really high-level recap of that. So RPP planning and contract requirements include a whole farm assessment, primary practices for RPP, soil health testing at the beginning and end of the contract, and a minimum 5-year contract period. And at the bottom of this slide is the link for the Regenerative Pilot Program website. Encourage you to visit that and learn more about RPP. Okay, so getting everybody on the same page about what an NRCS certified TSP is important for this conversation. TSPs are technical experts in their field. TSPs are certified by NRCS for specific types of technical assistance, including developing conservation plans, designing conservation practices, and overseeing the installation and certification of conservation practices. Certification requirements to be a TSP vary based on the services and the location in which they apply. TSPs are also hired by NRCS program participants to provide technical assistance in reaching their conservation goals. And that's extremely important. The TSP is hired by the producer or the program participant. So the types of TSPs vary across the nation and within a location. You have range and pasture specialists, agronomists, foresters, biologists, soil specialists, organic specialists, and engineers who all help us to achieve, in collaboration with that producer, the conservation that they want to put on their land. So what's a TSP look like under RPP? Very similar to what it looks like under our existing programs. And that means that the certified TSP may be hired by a program participant with an EQIP or a CSP financial assistance contract. Those certified TSPs may be hired by program participants to develop conservation plans, conducting those required whole farm assessments, to design RPP primary and supporting conservation practices, to perform technical assistance for practice design, installation oversight, and/or checkout, and to conduct the soil testing. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like, because CEMA 216 requires qualified individuals, but being TSP certified might help you to meet those criteria. So we'll dig into that a little bit more in just a few minutes. So as a closure to my section of the presentation here, I just want to encourage you to visit our website, nrcs.usda.gov/TSP. Okay, now we're going to move on to Allison Aquino, one of our regional certifiers for TSP and the acting regional coordinator for TSPs in the West. Allison? Allison, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm muted. Thanks. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Katina. In this section of the presentation, I will be sharing information on how TSP services provide support to the agricultural community throughout the NRCS conservation planning process. If you're already a TSP or considering becoming an NRCS certified TSP, this section should provide some clarity on where your technical specialties might best be utilized within the context of RPP. So let's begin with a broad overview of that process. It starts when a technical expert applies to become an NRCS certified TSP and is approved for one or more technical services in one or more states or territories. And once approved, their name appears in the Find a TSP database. Find a TSP is a publicly accessible website for those looking to hire a TSP. And there's a link to Find a TSP on our main NRCS TSP website. When an NRCS program participant is ready to find a TSP with the qualifications they are looking for, they will access that Find a TSP database and hire the TSP who meets their needs and has those certification requirements for this associated work. That TSP will perform those technical services, which corresponds to the funding in that NRCS Farm Bill contract, such as RPP. And then those completed work products or deliverables will be submitted to the NRCS field office staff. NRCS staff will then review the deliverables, and upon verification that the work products are complete, they will issue a payment for one or more of those completed TSP services in that RPP contract. The types of services that a TSP can offer fall into two main categories. Conservation activities, those include conservation planning activities or CPAs, design and implementation activities or DIAs, and the conservation evaluation and monitoring activities or CEMAs. Funding to complete conservation activities comes from NRCS financial assistance dollars or FA dollars and is typically included in that program application and if selected for funding in that initial contract obligation. The 900 series provides funding for TSP services that align with the design and implementation of a conservation practice. Funding for 911 design, 912 installation oversight, and 913 checkout of a completed conservation practice comes from NRCS technical assistance dollars or TA dollars and is added to an active Farm Bill contract through a contract modification at the request of the program participant. Those TSP services overlap with our 9 steps of conservation planning, a path used by NRCS to address the natural resource concerns of a customer's agricultural property. This conservation planning process is really the core of our Farm Bill programs, including RPP, and technical service providers can assist our NRCS program participants through all 9 steps. So what does that look like? The conservation planning activities, or CPAs, summarize the outcomes of steps 1 through 7 of that conservation planning process. The design and implementation activities overlap with the design aspect of step 8. And the CEMAs, the conservation evaluation and monitoring activities, can be utilized anywhere in the process, just depending on the needs of that customer. TSPs can also provide assistance to NRCS program participants through the 900 codes, which all fit in within step 8. But you can see step 8 is really 3 separate phases, but all related to the implementation of the selected conservation practices that were identified in steps 1 through 7. Funding for all of these TSP services comes through an obligated Farm Bill contract, such as RPP, that is between NRCS and the eligible producer. The applicant works with NRCS staff to discuss their overall goals, and based on what the best next steps are for them to reach those goals, they submit an application that correlates to essentially where they are in that conservation planning process. So the application may include 1 or more conservation activities or 1 or more conservation practices. So let's discuss all of these in more detail and how they specifically work within RPP. So again, steps 1 through 7 document those goals and objectives of an agricultural producer. They establish that baseline inventory of the natural resources on that land, provide recommendations or alternatives to address any of the resource concerns that are a priority for that customer. As mentioned previously, RPP requires a whole farm assessment, which corresponds to completing steps 1 through 7 for the full extent of the property in that contract. CPA 199 is one of the conservation planning activity options that offers the most broad outline for completing steps 1 through 7. So you'll see CPA 199 mentioned most frequently in the RPP materials, as it can really be utilized on any agricultural operation. However, as of this current fiscal year, there are 6 different CPAs available to complete steps 1 through 7. So depending on the needs or goals or land use of that customer, a different CPA might be more appropriate, such as a CNMP or a forest management plan, a grazing plan, soil health plan, or the development of a conservation plan for those looking to transition to organic. The results of any of these CPAs is a standalone document, which the NRCS program participant can use to make land management decisions related to natural resources. So some of those deliverables would include a map, 1 or more assessments of those natural resource conditions, really clear descriptions of the customer's goal, and alternatives to address those natural resource concerns and goals. Each CPA has a primary document which describes the intent of that activity and all of the deliverables the TSP will complete. These documents can all be found on the Conservation Activities website, which you can see an image of the page there. Each CPA has a link to its own PDF containing that information. So for example, the CPA 199 document begins with a definition, applicable land uses, and then the general and technical requirements of that activity. So each CPA, DIA, and CEMA has its own PDF, which is going to be the primary reference document for that activity. You heard earlier about many of the requirements specific to RPP. So the conservation planning activities that produce that documentation of steps 1 through 7 may, as they are written, contain many of those requirements. But discussions between the TSP, the program participant, and NRCS may result in a final conservation planning document that includes more or all of those elements, depending on the goals of the customer and the arrangement with the TSP. So for example, that selected alternative, which is documented in step 7 of the conservation planning process, can be 5 years long, which would meet the requirements of RPP. 1 or more of the conservation practices already utilized by the participant or selected to address the resource concerns may be on the list of RPP primary practices. CEMA 216 soil health testing may be scheduled at the beginning and end of that selected plan. And in situations where there are soil and water resource concerns, those conditions may meet or exceed the NRCS established threshold by the end of the plan by selecting conservation practices that affect that outcome. So as a TSP who is developing a CPA on behalf of a customer, those elements can be incorporated so that the overlapping product does include the requirements of the regenerative pilot program so that those requirements are fully documented. There's also optional elements that can be incorporated into a CPA document that also work within the RPP program goals, such as including other conservation practices, which are not listed as primary, but are supporting practices of those primary practices, or CEMA 217, which is a different CEMA, which also provides other soil-related testing results. So to summarize, CPA 199 can overlap with the requirements of RPP to increase outcomes that match RPP program requirements. Discussions can happen at the early stages so that there's communication about how to incorporate those elements. And when appropriate, the TSP may assess those RPP required resource concerns more fully or offer a planning alternative, which is 5 years in length, and ensure that goals related to RPP are fully documented in that final CPA document. Please keep in mind that the NRCS payment rates for TSP services, including CPAs, are calculated based on the deliverables that are currently described in that PDF. So that primary conservation activity document, and any variation from those deliverables should really be discussed and agreed upon with all involved parties ahead of time. For an RPP whole farm assessment, all the natural resource concerns must be assessed. NRCS maintains a list shown here of all those resource concerns that are to be assessed as part of the conservation planning process. So the RPP requirement that all soil and water resource concerns will be met by the end of the contract means those documented as below the allowable threshold at the beginning of the contract will be addressed through a conservation practice. And then by the end of the contract, it will meet that resource concern will meet or exceed that same threshold. So in order to accomplish that, those resource concerns must be thoroughly documented in steps 1 through 7. For each resource concern category, NRCS planning criteria is used to identify the minimum treatment necessary to meet or exceed that threshold. This framework is utilized by NRCS staff and then by TSPs when they are making recommendations to our customers. So planning criteria will take that documented resource concern and offer ways to improve the baseline condition through the installation or application of a conservation practice. So TSPs who are hired to complete the CPA will need to understand and utilize this information, only recommending conservation practices that are needed to bring those baseline conditions above the threshold. So to dig into that a bit further, the conservation practice physical effects worksheet describes the effects of each conservation practice on a resource concern. If you are hired as a TSP to complete a CPA, this resource can assist with the documentation needed to more thoroughly describe the natural resource concerns and how applying conservation practices through an RPP contract would directly address soil and water resource concerns and meet the requirements of that program. So TSPs can find a copy of this spreadsheet through the link shown on the slide or in the NRCS Field Office Technical Guide. So the Field Office Technical Guide, or FOTG or FOTOG, is a publicly available resource that provides a wide range of technical information related to natural resource concerns and documents associated with the NRCS conservation planning process. The Regenerative Pilot Program has a list of primary practices, of which at least one must be in the program application or documented as already being utilized on that land. So as mentioned before, supporting practices may also be included in that contract. As you see in this table, the conservation practices also have associated land uses on which they can be applied in RPP. So TSPs who are providing conservation practice recommendations as part of a CPA should be familiar with this table and avoid recommending a conservation practice on a land use where it is not allowed. This table is also a good reference for active TSPs or folks looking to become a certified TSP to see how you can support RPP more directly. So TSPs can apply to be certified for these practices if they meet the certification requirements. Let's move on to DIAs, or design implementation activities. So TSPs can provide the design of one or more conservation practices under a single DIA. DIAs are available, as you can see, for a variety of land uses or resource concerns. And when appropriate, NRCS staff will include a DIA in the Farm Bill application to provide funding for a TSP to complete the design needs of that customer. In steps 1 through 7, the customer selected one or more conservation practices to address their natural resource concerns. And then in this design phase of step 8, the details of those conservation practices are teased out. So for example, if the customer selected cover crop as a way to address a resource concern on their farm, then the design phase would provide, say, an exact seed mix or what the ground prep should be or how to terminate that growth to achieve the desired outcome, all the details of that conservation practice. NRCS uses implementation requirement forms, or IRs, to document all of the requirements associated with the design of a conservation practice. These forms are publicly available in that same Field Office Technical Guide and can be utilized by a TSP as part of the deliverables for their design services. Although they are not a required form, they can provide more clarity for the customer and ensure the deliverables are all documented. So for example, if a TSP is assisting with the design of cover crop through RPP funding, those soil and water resource concerns and how that practice is going to address them may be more clearly outlined on the IR template. These forms can be found in section 4 of the NRCS Field Office Technical Guide, along with other materials related to conservation practices. The CEMAs are the third type of conservation activity. You can see there's many CEMAs available to help customers better understand the current status of a particular aspect of their property or resource concern, or the outcome of the utilization of a conservation practice, or to collect other information which may be relevant to their decision making. So within RPP, CEMA 216 is required, and CEMA 217 may also be utilized, since it can also address regenerative considerations. CEMAs do differ, as Katina mentioned, from the other conservation activities, in that TSPs are not certified by NRCS to complete a CEMA. Instead, the customer selects a qualified individual, or a QI, who self-certifies that they meet the requirements of that specific CEMA. So individuals who meet those qualified individual requirements can complete the deliverables associated with that CEMA. NRCS does not approve or reject those qualifications, but NRCS certified TSPs who also meet the QI requirements can be hired to perform those services. So these evaluation and monitoring activities gather information that can play into the decision-making of a program participant. Some CEMAs provide funding for more in-depth forage and pasture analysis. Some provide funding for forest stand inventories. But because they are so varied, the qualified individual requirements for each vary as well. So if you're interested in being hired as a qualified individual, please read the specific QI requirements for that CEMA on that primary document on the Conservation Activities website. If there are multiple QI options listed there on the document, you only have to meet one of those options to self-certify as a QI for that CEMA. Okay, let's take a few minutes to discuss the 900 codes and how TSPs can provide technical assistance through all 3 phases of Step 8. So once a program participant has a funded contract, additional funding can be added through a contract modification so that the participant can hire a TSP to complete the design, the installation oversight, and/or certify that that conservation practice was installed to NRCS standards and specifications. So funding can be added for any or all of the 900 codes. A TSP may only be needed for the design, or may only be needed for technical support during practice installation, or they may be needed for all 3 steps. It's up to the preference and needs of that customer as how and when they would like to use a TSP for those services. The funding for each 900 code is added as an individual line item in the contract, with payment rates associated with the planned quantity of the related conservation practice. So the payment rates vary from state to state. So as a TSP, you can reference the state payment schedule for the fiscal year in which a contract was funded. A link to the state payment schedules is available on that NRCS TSP website under the Additional Resources section. The 900 series payment rates are actually not to exceed rates. So the final payment for those TSP services is based off of the TSP's invoice for those services. For RPP contracts, 911, 912, and 913 can be requested by the participant, and funding can be added to an active contract after that initial obligation is completed. So what does a TSP do in relation to the 900 codes? Those deliverables are all found on the Statement of Work document in the Field Office Technical Guide for the related conservation practice. So as mentioned before, the Field Office Technical Guide, publicly available resource. This Statement of Work document is housed in Section 4 along with the Conservation Practice Standards and other support documents. For any TSP who is hired to complete 911, 912, or 913, the Statement of Work is going to be the primary reference for deliverables. The Statement of Work document, as you can see here, Shows the deliverables for 9/11 design, 9/12 installation. Remember, this is installation oversight, technical assistance during installation. This is not meant to be actual assistance with manually installing or applying a conservation practice. And then 9/13, checkout. If these deliverables are ever unclear to the TSP or the participant, NRCS staff is available to help with that conversation and make sure the materials are developed correctly and efficiently and make sure that the needs of that customer are fully met. Each conservation practice has its own statement of work, and the statement of work documents can vary between states. So the TSP should make sure to reference the statement of work, or SOW, for the state in which the project is occurring. So we'll finish up this section of the presentation with a discussion on how TSPs are paid. We touched a little on this in some of the previous slides, but funding for TSP services is obligated in a Farm Bill contract between NRCS and the program participant. That Farm Bill funding may come through a program like the Regenerative Pilot Program, RPP. Once funding for TSP services is obligated, the TSP hired by the program participant can begin to complete the deliverables associated with that service or services. When those deliverables are completed, the work products are submitted to NRCS and payment is made. We highly recommend that the TSP and the participant have their own arrangement spelled out when they are first hired that clarifies what work needs to be done, what the time frame is, and how that payment will be made. So when it comes for the exchange of money for TSP services, it can be carried out however was previously arranged between the TSP and the program participant. Payments for TSP services are based on the quantity of that service. So conservation activities may be more broad, such as acres of planting or number of land units, whereas the payment for 9/11, 9/12, and 9/13 are based on the quantity of the associated conservation practice or quantity of units completed by the TSP, such as acres of a cover crop design or square feet of mulching applied. The NRCS Farm Bill contract documents will contain those details. It lists all the TSP services and the associated payment rate for that project. TSPs can always arrange an alternative payment rate for their service with the participant, but that should be discussed as part of that initial arrangement and agreed upon by both parties. NRCS does not get involved with the payment arrangements between the participant and the TSP. And lastly, as part of the signed TSP agreement, a TSP agrees that all of their work products will meet NRCS standards, specifications, and follow NRCS policy. We do have an example TSP agreement on the TSP website on that same additional resources page if you'd like to take a look at it. It's really critical that TSP understands the NRCS conservation planning process, where their services fit in, and how their technical support may result in the planning and implementation of conservation practices funded through the Regenerative Pilot Program. I will now turn it over to Amanda Branham, Director of the Soil Health Division for NRCS, who will discuss CEMA 216.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Amanda Branham. As Allison said, I'm the director of the Soil Health Division. I'm excited to be talking to you about CEMA 216. As you previously heard in the presentation, the CEMA 216 is required for every contract that's part of the Regenerative Pilot Program. So there's a lot of opportunity. Next slide. So I'm going to go through some of the ways that CEMA 216 is used with RPP and also some of the requirements. So our CEMA 216 is required at the beginning and the end of the contract. So for CSP, that would be in the first and the fifth year. EQIP contracts can be longer than 5 years. So it's at some point during that EQIP contract that CEMA 216 would have to be scheduled again. Scheduling CEMA 216 in higher frequency allows the participant to be able to look at trends over time of what the results that they're getting for soil health indicators and can help them understand what's going on with their land management and how external factors are influencing the soil health results that they're getting. They have to be planned on at least one planning land unit, and there are requirements for the sampling, and looking at that land unit will help determine how many CEMAs need to be included on each of the land units, or where on the land units, et cetera. So there's a lot of different variables that the planner will look at when working with the client initially to determine where and how many CEMA 216 should be contracted. And then after they're contracted, at that point, the participant would start working with a qualified individual. Next slide. So we do get a lot of questions about if someone had already been implementing soil health testing on their property, if they're still eligible, and if it's still appropriate for qualified individuals to work with that participant. And the answer is absolutely. It doesn't matter if the participant had previously been doing soil health testing before. It's still required as part of the program, and they absolutely can keep moving forward with that. Soil and source testing for nutrient management is optional, but it is something that can be contracted together with soil health testing. And a lot of times there can be a more robust set of data provided to producers if they contract both of them together. Of course, soil and source testing for nutrient management is really only applicable for land where the intent is to apply nutrients, which is different from CEMA 216, which can be done on any land use, any land management. Next slide. So as previously stated, CEMAs are unique that a qualified individual can complete them. The person does not have to be a certified TSP to complete them, and QIs do self-certify. However, there are criteria for qualified individuals that a person who is considering providing this service to a participant would need to consider. So these are listed here. There's several different options here. The QI would only have to meet one of them. So a QI could be a certified crop advisor, a certified professional agronomist. There could be a technical service provider who had previously been certified to do soil health management plans or soil health management design and implementation activity. And then, of course, if you don't have those, an associate's degree or higher in ag or soil science with at least 2 years of sampling experience. And the reason that that's important is that the sampling protocols are very specific, and it's necessary that folks are familiar with them, and they wouldn't be doing them for the first time. I do also want to point out, because we get this question a lot, that if there is somebody who is working under the guidance of somebody who meets the above criteria, they are also allowed to collect the samples and receive payment for those under this CEMA. Next slide. One of the most critical things about CEMA 216 is that the labs that are being chosen have the certifications that are needed. We get a lot of questions about, can I use this lab to perform soil health testing services? And what you have to do is contact the lab, make sure that they either are working under one of the certification programs that's listed here, or that they are working under a state-approved certification program. The state-approved certification programs are not, NRCS doesn't police those, but we just need to make sure that they have criteria established for the lab performance and the accuracy of the results. If they have established criteria and the state has certified that they, when I say state, I mean state government, not NRCS in that state. The state government has approved them, and they show that they can, that they have criteria, that they're assessing the performance, they're making sure that the results that are coming out of the laboratory analysis is correct, we can use them. Most often, we're working with labs that are certified under the Performance Assessment Program with the North American Proficiency Testing Program. So NAPT, you may often hear of labs being certified by NAPT. NAPT has changed their program from doing overall certifying to certifying specific laboratory indicators and the methods of those indicators. So that is a change from previous years, and that does expand the list of labs. So that's really one of the most important things if you are a QI working with a participant, is to make sure that that there's a lab available for them to use, and knowing what the certification is and the criteria are for that lab. The lab will also probably have specific handling and shipping information that is important, and you'll want to contact the lab in advance to understand those requirements. Additionally, if you're working in states where there's a quarantine on soils, for example, in places where there's fire ants, APHIS has a quarantine on the soils, you need to make sure that the lab that you're sending the samples to has the appropriate permits to be able to accept that sample and then properly dispose of the sample once the analysis is complete. Next slide. So that first bullet of review the laboratory requirements under recommendations, I kind of just went into detail about that. The locations of the labs, this is pretty constantly changing. So I do just want to caution you that we have been working with a lot of labs that previously didn't do any soil health testing, and they now have determined that it is now commercially viable for them to start doing soil health testing. So they have started offering the service. So you do want to make sure that you're getting updated information about the availability of labs, and you can go to the NAPT website to find out more information. You can work with your local NRCS to see if they have information about labs. And then, of course, the labs should be advertising their services. But there's many labs who previously did not offer it who now do. And so just make sure that you check on that when you're working with the client. There's more information on the website. And we also have we have done some webinars that have been recorded. We had done a CEMA 216 webinar earlier in last summer, and then we released a new version of CEMA 216 that streamlined it and reduced the number of indicators that needed to be tested, reduced the number of methods that were required for it. And so that has been re-released and updated. So there's a new CEMA 216 on our website. And because of that, we also updated several of our directives. We provided a job aid, and we provided a new training resource. So on conservationwebinars.net, if you're familiar with that website, you can go there. And if you just type in the search CEMA 216, it should pop up and you should be able to get it. Of course, I understand these are going to be shared afterward as well, and these links can be clicked. Next slide. So I have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Charlotte Brewster, who is the National TSP Program Manager. And for any other questions on CEMA 216, I will put my contact information available for you. So Charlotte.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I see you've already learned quite a bit about the Regenerative Pilot Program. You've learned about the practices and activities associated with that program. And it's my pleasure to now talk to you about the process of how to become a certified TSP, or if you're already certified, how to modify in those practices that are either the primary or optional practices or activities for RPP. So in order to become a certified TSP, TSPs must be formally certified by NRCS for the services that they want to offer. All of this is done by also visiting the certification criteria, which are listed on our NRCS TSP website. Our certification criteria list out those requirements for certification and include a national level criteria, and depending on the state for which you would like to be certified in, also some state-specific requirements or otherwise state level criteria. Requirements for certification, again, may vary by conservation activity, conservation practice, and also the geographic location for which you hope to provide technical service. These criteria often include one or many of the following: a completion of technical training provided by NRCS, work experience, professional certifications held by professional organizations, at times samples of work, and then also anything additional that may be specified by the state. So I'd like to just highlight, if you're standing there considering certification in any, practice or conservation activity, it's important to know that there's up to 3 or so paths for which you can seek certification through the traditional means of applying. So the first one is professional certification. Again, I just highlighted if you have, perhaps a professional certification with one of our identified organizations in our criteria, that is definitely a pathway. You can also come in, and some practices only require experience only. And then lastly, the other pathway alternative is a combination of education and experience. So that might include a college degree and some years of experience actually implementing that practice out in the field. So here's a nice example of contour farming. If you were to approach NRCS registry and want to really kind of get an idea of if you qualify for contour farming, I would first point you to our website where we have this certification outlined. Contour farming is one of those primary practices for the Regenerative Pilot Program. And I'm going to lead you from left to right across the screen. You'll see there are 2 pathways for certification for contour farming. The pathway at the top is professional certification. So in order to be certified for contour farming, if you were to select this pathway, you would need certification in at least one of the following. So whether that be the American Society of Agronomy certification, Soil Science Society of America, National Alliance of Independent Crop Consultants, or a professional engineer license. If you did possess one of those certifications, therefore you could meet the criteria that's required to become certified for contour farming. If you did not possess one of those professional certifications, we have an education and experience pathway existing for the certification of contour farming. So what that means is you would have to have not only the education, but also the experience in order to be certified through this pathway. That entails having an associate's or higher degree in the identified fields, and then also have the ability to demonstrate at least 2 years experience in planning, design, installation, layout, inspection, checkout, and certification of this practice. So this is just a really nice example of what it is like to identify something you may want to become certified in, taking a look at the criteria, and then figuring out which pathway is best for you in order to become certified. Here is another CPA, in this case, the Conservation Planning Activity CPA 199 is identified as an optional for the Regenerative Pilot Program. And there's only one pathway in this example for the CPA 199, and that is a certification pathway. This includes technical training and a sample of work, and I'll be showing that in these following slides. If you are wanting to provide a CPA 199 and become certified as a TSP to provide this CPA, this is the first portion of that certification criteria, which outlines all of the courses that are required. Again, this is an alignment with our conservation planning policy. And you can see here, there's 22 courses identified here on this criteria. I would like to bring your attention to those bolded courses, which are actually in person and not provided solely online on our AgLearn platform, but do require an in-person presence. These courses can be a bit difficult to get into or to find, depending on your location. And that's why I bring you to the Green Star. Once you receive, or you're able to follow this link, I just wanted to point out that we are currently offering a pilot training for the Conservation Planning Part 2. This pilot training is offered several times throughout the year. This year, again, it's just a pilot, but it provides that training, and we encourage everyone to, if you're seeking this certification, to keep an eye out for that pilot as it may be coming nearby to you. So in addition to that list of courses, again, for CPA 199 example, the certification criteria also requires a sample of work. I'm not going to read down through here, but the CPA 199 does have a rigorous certification criteria, but the certification is for providing that conservation plan. So please visit the criteria, understand that each criteria may differ depending on the practice or the conservation activity. So in more looking broadly, individuals with the required qualifications must always apply through our NRCS registry website. This can be done by a quick Google of NRCS registry. We encourage those individuals wanting to seek certification to log on to NRCS registry. Once logged on, you will be given a TSP number that will follow you through your application process. You will also quickly, hopefully, receive right after that access to our AgLearn platform, where you can go and take the required courses that are identified in the certification criteria. Once you work through that application and provide all of the required documents, you will then go through and sign a certification agreement with NRCS, which outlines those services that you are applying for and want to perform, the location and territories that you may want to perform those services, and also sign the statement regarding the legal responsibilities you would have as a technical service provider. If you are approved for certification, that would result in the fact that your name would show up on our publicly available list for everyone to see. It's a Find a TSP is the name of our public website, from which our NRCS program participants can review and select folks that they want to provide technical service to them. So your considerations in wanting to visit TSP certification. Consider your technical discipline and your qualifications. Take a look at our website and review the national level criteria, and then also consider the states you may want to apply in. And if there's anything above and beyond that national criteria that's outlined by the state that is specific to those particular states. Also, what is needed, utilized, and available in your service area? Get familiar with your area. Many of you are already experts in the field. You know what goes on in your area, the kind of cropping or livestock that is customary to your area. Get familiar with the NRCS programs that are utilized as well. This will help you understand better how to gauge your approach to TSP certification. Lastly, payment rates and deliverables. Our payment rates are published on the website. View NRCS payment schedules. That's the payment rates. Also consider your awareness of required deliverables for work products. So if you're visiting that payment rate, also consider the deliverables for that product, as some deliverables are quite extensive, while others, might reflect differently. So, for brand new folks, if you are interested in becoming a certified TSP, we highly encourage you to start a new TSP application. If you have a business, if you want to associate other folks to that business, we still always start with that TSP application as an individual. And I know some of you may be aware, but we have these regional coordinators. A map will be shown later in the presentation, but they are an excellent resource. We have folks on our staff that can assist you with this application process. So again, you would start an application as an individual, and your entity or business name can be associated with a business application after that primary certification. You would complete the required trainings and develop samples of work as needed. Again, the TSP orientation and conservation planning course is required for everyone if they want to become a certified TSP, and that course is available in AgLearn, as well as throughout the year. We may have that provided as well on some meetings that are on our website. So we highly encourage visiting that website and becoming familiar. So once that required training is done, your samples of work are done, you upload all of that in NRCS registry in your application, review, sign those agreements and statements, and submit your application for consideration of certification. So that's the process if you are walking in as a brand new TSP. For those those valued TSPs that we already have, if you've seen practices today that were identified as primary practices, optional practices, or anything else that's of interest to you that you're not currently certified for, we also highly encourage starting a modification application. Once you're logged in as an individual, you can modify to add in those RPP primary practices or optional conservation activities as applicable to your credentials. So that will be done by completing any required trainings that may be in addition to what you already have, any additional samples of work required, and again, choosing the states where you intend to provide those new practices that you are modifying in. You upload that documentation, review, sign the certification agreement, and submit your application for review for those modified practices. So that is the process. If you are currently certified and want to go in to add some additional practices, that can be done through modification. And the last slide I'll go ahead and review is a reminder of quality assurance. So we all pride ourselves in good work. Producers and NRCS expect quality deliverables. And just a quick reminder, NRCS does have the ability to decertify a TSP if the TSP does one of the following: fails to meet NRCS standards and specifications and the provisions of technical services, violates the terms of a certification agreement, engages in scheme or device, or commits any other action of a serious or compelling nature as determined by NRCS that demonstrates the TSP's inability to fulfill the terms of the certification agreement or provide technical services. So we pride ourselves in understanding, that we want quality work. We also remind our technical service providers, we have our staff here to help you through the certification process. Also, there's a wealth of information on many of our websites, including those documents which outline the deliverables. Being more familiar with those would create, just the knowledge and expertise in what's required when we get to the end product and look forward to payment. So with that, I would like to turn this back over to Katina for the summary and wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to cover just a couple more slides and then we'll jump into the Q&A. Just a reminder, there's a lot of benefits to being an NRCS certified TSP. Income, NRCS certified TSPs are paid to complete the technical assistance needs of Farm Bill program participants. It can also help you to expand your business. NRCS certified TSPs can also be hired for other services, the actual construction or implementation of a conservation practice in the same contract, or services outside of that NRCS contract. Getting work as a TSP, our Find a TSP website is very helpful for producers to be able to find someone to help them with the work that they need to get conservation on the ground. You can also advertise through your business website or professional certifications. You can engage with state and local NRCS staff to learn more about the regional programs and patterns and attend NRCS meetings, introduce existing or new clients to NRCS programs, and just offering quality services that are in high demand and offering specialties can help. We also encourage you to work effectively with our NRCS staff. Again, we do have the TSP regional coordinators that can help with certification, state offices, area offices, and very importantly, our field offices that can help with contract questions, payments, and program policy. A TSP should understand their role in the conservation planning process and the Farm Bill contracting process. They have to provide their own equipment. They need to be familiar with deliverables and completeness of work products, so the required effort is not underestimated. And a TSP should thoroughly review the final work products with the program participant to agree on quantities and outcomes before submitting to NRCS. So being a TSP for RPP is very similar to being a TSP for any other NRCS activity. Under RPP, you can help with developing conservation plans, designing RPP primary and supporting conservation practices, performing that technical assistance, and some certified TSPs may also have the documented skills to help with QIs, like the CEMA 216 that we heard about earlier. Again, we encourage you to visit the RPP website for more information about that initiative. And our NRCS TSP regional coordinators, you're welcome to take a screenshot here, but it is also available on our website, which is nrcs.usda.tsp.gov. Sorry, nrcs.usda.gov/TSP, and it's on the next slide. Okay, I ran through that rather quickly so that we could get to a few questions here. I know there's a lot that have been already answered in the Q&A. Thanks. Passing it to you, Peter.
Thank you, Katina. My name is Peter Hoagland. I am the Northeast Regional or North Region TSP Coordinator and acting South Region TSP Coordinator. We do have quite a few questions in the chat, and we're doing our best to, or in the Q&A, and we're doing our best to keep up with those questions. But we will be pulling all the questions that we receive into a document to summarize all the questions and answers that we receive. But we want to go over a few questions that we've highlighted here in the Q&A. As far as TSP application process and information about soil health testing. And so first of all, we want to mention, yes, this call is being recorded. We are going to post it on the website here. Once we have clearance to do so, we need to do a little bit of work to get it formatted and get it properly posted, but sooner rather than later, we'll get it posted on our website. We did have a question about the QR code here. If you don't have a smartphone and you want to answer the questions in the QR code, that link is also in the Q&A. We have some questions about how this process works for plain sect farmers who don't have internet or computers, and really any producer, any landowner can apply for NRCS assistance programs in person at their local NRCS field office. They do not have to have access to internet or computers in order to apply for financial assistance. We have a question about if producers will be allowed to complete their whole farm assessments and year one soil health tests before selecting practices to implement over the life of their contract. So the whole farm assessment needs to be completed prior to contracting. and prior to contracting of practice implementation specifically. The CEMA 216 is required of the program requirement in year 1 and in the final year. We did post a few links to some updated documents, especially the resource concern and planning criteria and the CPPE. There were a few questions about if payments can go directly to TSPs. That can happen. However, the payments will go directly to the program producer, but the program producer, program participant, excuse me, has the option to sign a payment form. Sorry, it's escaping me right now, but there's a payment form that they can sign to have the payment go directly to the TSP or the QI. If you do have follow-up questions,
payment. That's an assignment.
Sorry, the assignment of payment form. Thank you. If you do have follow-up questions, please feel free to send them to the tsp@usda.gov. We recognize we weren't able to get to every single question that we received today, and we are running close on time right now. So I'm going to pass it back over to Katina. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining today. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen, and we look forward to answering your questions as we move forward. Thank you so much, and please help us to get conservation on the ground. Thanks.